Hello there, welcome back to the channel, or welcome to the channel if you are new. My name is Mackenzie, this is the Women's Direction, and is your film studies course sexist? Roman Polanski, Stanley Kubrick, Jean-Luc Godard, Alfred Hitchcock. What do all of these names have in common, you might ask? Well, they are all male directors on film studies course curriculums. Alongside these names are a plethora of other directors whose films have subsequently been dubbed classics over the years, but I will give you one guess as to how many of them are women. Yes, in today's video, we are diving into the world of film education to investigate the impact it has on the lack of female and non-binary filmmaker representation in the industry today. But before we get started, I just wanted to let you know that there is a written version of this video up on the blog right now. So if that is more your speed, you can go and check it out at www.thewomensdirection.com and give it a read. On there, of course, we've also got film reviews, interviews with up-and-coming new filmmakers that you may not have heard of yet, plus heaps more. So if you're interested, go and check it out. The link will be in the description box below. Now, back to the topic at hand. At the time of my studies in the mid-2010s, it didn't actually cross my mind, at least consciously, that most of the films we were studying were directed by men. And whilst it's been a while since I graduated, the curriculum I've discovered is still pretty much the same. It's very male-centric, and it's also very heavily rooted in the past, which makes sense because studying how film started and how it's evolved through the years is very beneficial. But during my research, the most modern film I found on a study list was Moonlight, which came out in 2016. So this kind of signifies to me that universities are completely disregarding modern cinema as worthy of study. A far more likely explanation is the amount of time it takes to get resources approved for study through the absolute nightmare that is the education system.
This is the worst!
But even this still doesn't explain why in 2023, most of the film students are studying are directed by men. So I took a look at 2023 Introduction to Film Studies course curriculums from 3 Australian universities to compare what films were being studied. Now, the total amount of films I found directed by a woman on these lists was 2 out of a total of 10 or 12 films, which comes out to an average of about 16% of the curriculum. Knowing that the student body studying these courses is actually a lot closer to a 50-50 gender split, this really isn't acceptable, particularly moving into the 2020s. The other factor that bothered me about these lists is that I looked at the course I did back in 2014 and the list of films, bar like 2, was still exactly the same, which means that in around 10 years, the curriculum hasn't really changed. And the 2 films that were added weren't new modern cinema films, they were just new ones from the past. As I stated before, I think it's important that students study films from the past to gain a good understanding of how film started, how it's progressed, how they used the technologies they had at the time, and how these past films have shaped the films we see today. Yet, what these film studies courses don't include is the pioneering women of cinema. I mean, how did I do an entire film studies degree and not know who Alice Guy Blaché is? Wait, you don't know who Alice Guy Blaché is? Well, from 1896 till 1906, she was the only female film director in the entire world, and she produced, directed, or supervised over 600 silent films ranging from 1 minute to 30 minutes in length. She is also known for having created the very first film with a fictional story. Now, a lot of her films are in private collections or in university or film archives, but surely you could get at least one to screen for an entire class of budding film buffs. My point still stands that we don't really hear or learn about these pioneering women in cinema when we study it. So much so, in fact, that Columbia University actually started the Women Film Pioneers Project, which is a website that you can go to learn all about these women, including Alice Guy. It is kind of disappointing that you have to turn to external resources outside of your film course to learn about these women, though. So to give you a bit of an example, and to put into context everything we're talking about, Here is the list of film resources from the Introduction to Film Studies courses from the 3 universities I researched. First up is the University of New South Wales Introduction to Film Studies course. Do the Right Thing, directed by Spike Lee.
You the man. No, you the man. No, you the man. No, you the man.
Rebel Without a Cause, directed by Nicholas Ray.
You're tearing me apart!
Vertigo, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. The Virgin Suicides, directed by Sofia Coppola. Battleship Potemkin, directed by Sergei Eisenstein. The Conversation, directed by Francis Ford Coppola.
Be careful, Harry. You're just supposed to listen.
Unforgiven, directed by Clint Eastwood. The Gleaners and I, directed by Agnes Varda.
Celle du titre de ce documentaire, c'est moi.
And M, directed by Fritz Lang. Then I looked at the University of Sydney's Introduction to Film Studies course, and the films listed in that curriculum were Rear Window, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. In the Mood for Love, directed by Wong Kar-wai. Billy Elliot, directed by Stephen Daldry. Man with a Movie Camera, directed by Dziga Vertov. Floating Life, directed by Clara Law. The Shining, directed by Stanley Kubrick.
Here's Johnny.
Walkabout, directed by Nicholas Roeg. Who Killed Vincent Chin, directed by Christine Choi and Renee Tajima Pena. All That Heaven Allows, directed by Douglas Sirk. Castle in the Sky, directed by Hayao Miyazaki. Persona, directed by Ingmar Bergman. And Waltz with Bashir, directed by Ari Folman. And lastly, I looked at the University of Adelaide's Introduction to Film Studies course. The films were Moonlight, directed by Barry Jenkins. The Third Man, directed by Carol Reed.
Come out, whoever you are.
Battleship Potemkin, directed by Sergei Eisenstein. Breathless, directed by Jean-Luc Godard. Shadow of a Doubt, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Rear Window, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Psycho, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. The Birds, directed by, you guessed it, Alfred Hitchcock. Ghost in the Shell, directed by Mamoru Oshii. Under the Skin, directed by Jonathan Glazer. Children of Men, directed by Alfonso Cuarón.
Your baby is the miracle the whole world has been waiting for.
And Upstream Colour, directed by Shane Carruth. Now, you may have noticed, but there were reoccurring names that came up on each of these lists. What's interesting to me is that the female director names don't reoccur over these lists. In fact, each university is using a different female-directed film within their curriculum. So could we argue then that female directors don't create classics? Because that's what some of these male directors' names are synonymous with, right? Classic, staple, must-watch. Names like Alfred Hitchcock, Jean-Luc Godard, Wong Kar-wai are all notable names within the industry. I mean, I would argue that Sofia Coppola and Agnes Varda are also notable names in the industry, but their names don't reoccur over the lists. Using the classic as a basis for film studies puts us at a standstill. I mean, how are film students supposed to learn to tell new and interesting stories if we won't stop showing them the same viewpoints from the past? And how do we determine that these films were even classics in the first place? The Oxford Dictionary defines classic as judged over a period of time to be the highest quality and outstanding of its kind, or very typical of its kind. I would argue that that definition has also come to include a level of popularity or notoriety as well. For example, since Hitchcock was in popularity, it has subsequently been revealed that he was actually abusive to his actresses. Tippi Hedren came out and revealed a whole bunch of trauma she received from filming with him on The Birds. I'll leave a link to an article in the description box below if you want to go and read about what she said happened. So do we still hold his work on a pedestal knowing what he had to do to create it, or are we fine with separating the art from the artist? I mean, particularly after the Me Too movement, it kind of seems insensitive to keep studying these films where we know the women were treated badly by their male directors. It's hard to say whether film, or indeed any other art form, can ever lose its title of classic, but perhaps because we keep putting them on film studies lists, it perpetuates this idea that they really are the best example of what film has to offer, even, regardless of what we come to know of them after the fact. The Shining is on the University of Sydney's film studies list, and I feel like most people know now that Shelley Duvall had a terrible time filming that movie with Stanley Kubrick. I mean, I would even argue that separating those allegations from the filmmaker, there are still better examples of films that could be put forward to be studied. The week The Shining is listed as a resource, they're studying mise-en-scène. And I feel like any film could be put forward to study this topic. For those unaware, mise-en-scène is the arrangement of props and scenery, etc. on the stage of a theatrical production or on the set of a film. And if you really wanted to stick with the 80s horror thing for this week, I can think of at least 2 female-directed examples that you could include here instead of The Shining. They are Pet Sematary and Slumber Party Massacre. But those 2 aren't considered classics, so I guess Stanley Kubrick wins here.
And that's the team.
Now, I'm not saying that the films on these lists aren't good. In fact, when I studied film, the films that we watched I really enjoyed, and I think a lot of them have a lot to offer when it comes to studying film. I'm also not saying that every male-directed film should be replaced by one directed by a woman, but when you only have 10 to 12 films to show a student body the key elements of filmmaking, there have got to be some female-directed examples out there that you could show instead. Where do we change the gender inequality issue present within the film industry? I would argue it's with the next generation of filmmakers. If women and non-binary people cannot see themselves represented in the very first step of their filmmaking journey, it's so disheartening. I mean, I had this feeling the other day. I was doing some research on the videography, video production side of the women's direction, and every other company I came across was full of men. And I just felt like a fish out of water, and it made me want to give up, if I'm being completely honest. So if you have a 50-50 gender split of students going in to study film, and then only about 20% of the industry is women, yeah, something's going wrong there.
Something's not right.
I know that there are multiple factors to consider, but just studying more female-directed films and analysing stories from a multitude of voices while studying the art form that you want to use to tell your stories is so important to making sure the industry continues to grow. To prove a point, I actually created a 12-week curriculum using only female-directed films, and you can check that out on the blog version of this video, which is over at thewomensdirection.com. Link in the description below. So what do you think? Do film studies need an overhaul? Let me know in the comments below, and if you studied film, let me know which films you studied. Which ones did you like? Do you think it's super male-centric and heavily rooted in the past? I'd be curious to know what you think. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you would like to hang around, and hit the bell icon, because then you'll be notified when my next video comes out. And that's always fun. We're on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at The Women's Direction, so go and give us a follow. You can see all the fun and exciting things that we are doing all the time, which is exactly what you want, right? That's what you want. I will see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching again. Bye-bye! Hitchcock. What do all these names have in common? My phone. That is what they have in common. Shut up. What do you want from me? Another video, another list of difficult names to pronounce. Battleship Definitely got some of those wrong. I'm sorry.